Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another Inno8 Answers. We're going to do something a little bit different today. We get asked a lot about the different tools that we use and sort of our process and sort of the collection of tool set that we use. So we thought we would take the session today to just talk you through what are the tools that we use at Inno8 for most of our product development, working with our clients, and just share some experience about, what do we like about some of them, what do we not like about some of them that we tried before, and just walk you through kind of our tool set. And so for those of you that don't know me, my name is Jeff Francis. I'm the founder of Inno8. We're a digital innovation studio located here in Dallas, Texas. We're a two-time Inc. 5000 company. And me personally, I've worked with probably more than 200 different startups over the years on building and launching software products. And so we do Inno8 Answers as sort of our way to share a lot of the experiences that we have, answer a lot of the common questions that we get from prospective customers that we talk to and our clients that we work with on a day-to-day basis. So hope you guys get a lot of value out of the session today. And if you don't already, make sure you follow us on LinkedIn, follow me on LinkedIn, and feel free to reach out. I'll give an email address at the very end of the video where you can drop us a note with any questions or comments or even suggestions for future topics that you might like us to tackle. We're going to kind of dive into tools, and I thought we kind of divided this into sections. And the first that we're going to start with here is more of the development focused tools. And so like development / project management tools. A lot of this stuff is just meant to really help you organize your work and maintain visibility and control and planning of your work. And so the big one here is probably one that most of you have heard of. It's a pretty widely used tool. A lot of people have sort of love-hate relationships with Jira. We use Jira for most of all of our projects. A couple things that we like about it. One is that it's pretty widely used, so people are familiar with it. Secondly is it supports a couple of different project types. We primarily use one of two different types of projects. We'll either use more of a Scrum style project in Jira, which is most of our product development is going to be using that. Other times we'll opt for more of a Kanban style project, which Jira supports both of those. They have templates for it and you can kind of configure it however you want to. It's got a lot of customization capability. In terms of setting up the project, we tend to use more of a Scrum project when we're in a build phase. We've got some sort of a defined body of work that we're taking. So if think of like an SOW with a defined scope, a defined timeline budget, we would tend to use more of a Scrum style board for that, or ongoing product development. Like we've got a full product team spun up, us or along with the client as well. And we're doing our ceremonies and our process on an ongoing basis. It doesn't really have a defined end date necessarily. It's sort of ongoing product development. We'll use Kanban in Jira a lot of times when it's more of a maintenance project or it's a small scale project where there's not a lot of heavy planning and coordination needed, where it's more just identify the work, get the work on the board, prioritize it, estimate it, and then approve it to be worked on. So, Jira does a great job of supporting both of these types of projects. Jira also integrates with almost everything out there. So you can integrate it with Slack, or one feature that I think we like a lot is that in Jira, you can integrate it with GitHub if that's a repository that you're using. And so you can actually see for each ticket, is there a branch open for it? Is there a pull request? What's the status of those? And you can see all that stuff right there inside the ticket. And a lot of times that's really helpful, especially for a Scrum Master, to kind of see what's going on with the work right there from within Jira. In terms of the types of things that we do in there, especially in more of the Scrum style board, we would definitely be a heavy user of the backlog. The backlog planning is laid out really well. It's easy to use. It's a great tool for capturing requirements, documenting the requirements. You can create things like epics, task stories, bugs, all these different types of things to track in the backlog. And then part of the process typically is going to be you're constantly grooming that backlog. So as you add things to it and you're planning, you're detailing it out, you're adding things like your test scenarios to that, acceptance criteria, estimating, whether you're doing that estimation in story points or you're doing it in hours. You can put all that in Jira. And then you can associate those items with epics. So the backlog tool has a pretty good feature where you can create your epics, which are the bigger bodies of work, and then you can create the associated user stories and tasks that go along with that, and you can map it to the epics. So the epic view will give you a more high level picture of kind of where you are at a broad view, and then the backlog will help you sort of break that into the smaller work items so you can really kind of detail those out. It's really nice because you can drag stuff around up and down in the priority list. You can add version tags, you can add release tags, priority. It's got kind of everything you need in terms of being able to customize that and sort of set it up the way that you feel comfortable with. Backlog grouping I mentioned, estimation is a big deal there, and you can see that in the view, so you can sort of see what's the relative size of that ticket in comparison to the other things in the backlog. You can go ahead and put people's names on it and kind of group things together and start to plan your sprints. So as we're putting things in the backlog and grooming it, we'll go ahead and start to create sprints within that backlog, start planning those so that we can stay ahead of the developers that are already hopefully in a sprint that's already been properly planned beforehand. So the other kind of thing that's pretty nice in there is the commenting within the tickets. So if people have questions, they can add comments, they can tag other people, they get notifications. This integrates with Slack. So when people get assigned things or somebody gets tagged in things, it can ping you in Slack and let you know. So it sort of speeds up the turnaround time on getting back to those comments. And what I like about it is it keeps the comments focused around a particular ticket. So if you're documenting it elsewhere, sometimes it can be hard to reference documentation, but with it being inside the ticket, then it makes it a lot easier. So a lot of good things to like about Jira. A couple of downsides that we find is, especially around permissions and user management, it can be a little bit cumbersome. I think that's because they're trying to strike that balance between it being really robust and customizable, and then trying to balance that with making it easy to use. So just beware if you're trying to manage permissions and set up certain types of roles and access within Jira. You're going to probably need to look at that quite a bit because it can be a little bit tricky. But overall, Jira is a really good tool. In terms of pricing, they've got free plans out of the gate. So small teams, you probably can get by for a pretty long time on just a free plan with Jira. So Jira is built by Atlassian, and Atlassian has a whole different suite of products. The next one I thought I would mention here is another Atlassian product called Confluence, and it works really well in conjunction with Jira. We use Confluence in a pretty basic way, but it's really helpful. That's where we tend to do all of the documentation related to the product development. And so think things like documenting requirements, even meeting notes, planning. They've got all kinds of templates in Confluence that can help you get started, but it's so tightly integrated with Jira that it becomes very useful. So picture yourself making sure that you're documenting requirements in Confluence, for instance, and then you can create tickets and then link those in Jira to the Confluence page that's relative, right? Or relevant. So Confluence, I think the biggest win there is not any kind of groundbreaking functionality. I think the biggest win is that it's within sort of the Atlassian suite, and it integrates really nicely with Jira. So it makes it a great documentation duo along with Jira, right? Other things that you might want to keep there are documenting things like architecture. It would be a good one to put in over there. You may do those elsewhere, but then you want to document that there. Reference links, even just high level information about the team. So I've seen people put pages in there that have, the different team members, what are their roles and responsibilities, contact information, different things like that. Even setup instructions, onboarding instructions for new developers. So, when they come onto the team, what are the sort of steps that you need to go through in order to get a new developer onboarded, instructions for them to get their environment set up, that kind of stuff. Confluence is a really great place to do that. Another one worth mentioning is hopefully your team is doing retrospective meetings. It's really valuable, but they get skipped a lot of times. And so they've got templates in Confluence where you can actually run your retrospective meetings using a Confluence template, document everything in there and save them so you kind of have that reference history. Us, because we work with clients as sort of an external partner a lot of times, We'll even use it for sign-offs on requirements, communicating with the clients to help make sure that we're on the same page about what their expectations are, what we're planning to deliver. Confluence is a great place to do that because, like many wikis, you can has time date stamps, you can comment on things, so it's a very collaborative sort of documentation approach. So Confluence pairs really well with Jira. So, and it's pretty cost effective. Again, I think they offer a free plan for Confluence, just like they do with Jira. And for small teams, you could probably get pretty far on a free version of Confluence. And even if you have to bump up to the paid version, it's not outrageous in terms of pricing. So if we tilt over a little bit more to design tools have changed a lot over the years. Today, we use Figma primarily for design. And as of recently, we've shifted to also using FigJam. Years ago, I was a big fan of InVision, which was one of the sort of big prototyping tools that was pretty popular quite a few years ago. And they did a great job with that product. We used that along with Photoshop. The thing that was a little bit cumbersome there is you would do a lot of your design in Photoshop. Then you would need to put those designs in InVision and then set up the links and stuff so you could have prototypes. So it was like sort of a multi-step process. Well, a couple of things that Figma did really good, which made our team like it a lot, is the biggest thing is it's very easy to collaborate with non-designers within Figma. So Figma, you can do all the design in it, much like you could with like Photoshop years ago. But what Figma has done a really good job of is adding capabilities to invite other users to collaborate on a Figma design. And the commenting and everything is really easy and straightforward. So it makes it very streamlined for a designer to create mock-ups, share those with stakeholders. They can easily access it. They can add comments, post questions, that kind of thing. The designers can then, reply back in line with those comments, and they're sort of associated to particular pieces of the design. You can sort of drop pins and put comments on it. So we just find that Figma does a great job of making design easy, but also making the collaboration really easy as well for people who may not be comfortable with design tools. So that's probably one of the biggest contributing factors of why Figma's gotten so big over the years. And I think it probably is not a stretch to say that more people use Figma for software product design now than maybe InVision or XD, some of the other tools that people have used a lot in the past. And then several years ago, we used to use a whiteboarding tool called Miro. We would primarily use that for workshops and sort of design sessions. We do a lot of design thinking type of activities with our clients, and we would use Miro for that. But now FigJam has, that product bundled with Figma. So they're kind of all there together in the same workspace. And again, it just makes it streamlined, easy. It's one tool, another fewer tool to have to manage, and their whiteboarding capabilities are really good. And so a lot of the templates and things that we had created in Miro that we used before in workshops and in design sessions, we've now moved those over into FigJam, and that's kind of our primary whiteboarding tool. In 08, our primary usage of FigJam is focused on the product development work that we do with our clients. Sometimes we'll use it more broadly, like in leadership meetings or marketing meetings, that kind of stuff, where we're wanting to sort of use that virtual whiteboarding capability of stickies and kind of brainstorming, that kind of stuff. We're not power users of it on that front, but we use it a lot in the product development realm. So FigJam paired with Figma, again, a fairly inexpensive tool. Just one thing about the tools is that be careful about users and user access. It's a good idea to probably have a periodic check-in on your licensing across different tools, kind of like FigJam and Figma, because they can add up over time. And you'd be surprised how much your cost can go up over time just because you add users, forget to deactivate them, or remove them as a billable license. And then over time, that monthly spend increases a whole lot. So we have like sort of an internal process where we review that stuff each month and then clean out all the ones that can be deactivated. I'd recommend you guys have some sort of simple process like that across all of your tool stack, just to make sure you're not spending more than you really need to on these tools. One last thing on FigJam, because remote work is a much bigger thing now. A lot of people work remote, teams are distributed. So a tool like that can be pretty good. I've actually seen teams use FigJam for doing their retrospectives rather than doing them over in Confluence, like I mentioned earlier. So again, they have a lot of different templates and sort of starters that you can use within the tool that may help you. Maybe you're more comfortable running that off of a FigJam board than you would be in Confluence, but I think the important thing is that you're doing the retrospectives and not so much about like what tool are you using for it. If we move on to more development infrastructure, GitHub is kind of our go-to repository. Sometimes we'll use AWS Code Commit if we're building something that's really heavy within the AWS environment. But GitHub is similar to some of the other tools I've talked about already in that it's widely used. People are really familiar with it. It's user-friendly for the most part, and it integrates with everything. So really simple design. I'm not a developer myself, but I can get around GitHub enough to see some of the things that I need to see if I'm trying to evaluate certain things at a really high level. I personally like the way in GitHub that you can look at, branching, history, commits, pull requests, and kind of see where things are when it was last updated. Again, I don't get into the technical details of the actual code, but more from a product management standpoint, I find it helpful to be able to kind of look at the repositories and make sure that, the activity is sort of matching what we see on the board. Another good thing that I mentioned earlier is that GitHub integrates with Jira. So when somebody opens a pull request, for instance, if they have that set up properly, then you can see that ticket is in progress. You can see it's got a branch that's been created for it. And, there's a lot of different philosophies around source code management. Me personally, I tend to recommend more what's called Git flow, where you have a couple of different main branches, or like a production branch, a staging environment branch, a development environment branch. Every ticket that you work on in Jira has its own branch that you break off of, develop, you work off of that, and then you end up doing a pull request to get that back into the develop branch. And then you sort of have a promotion process of moving that up until it gets into a live environment. But Git flow, I didn't include that in this presentation. If you're not familiar with it, check it out. You'd be surprised how many times you look at issues that are going on with the team. Sometimes they show up as maybe a bug that some for some reason is taking a long time to resolve, or they seem to be stuck on something. You'd be surprised how many times you go back to the basics of just good source code hygiene, good source code management, and repository management can help illuminate where some of the problems are sometimes. So a helpful tip for product managers is just making sure your team is following that process. And if you don't follow that process, make sure your process is documented and that everybody's sticking to it, whatever it is. And that sort of brings up another good use case for Confluence is we'll use it to document processes. So, what's your release process? What is your source code management process? Those different types of approaches that you sort of settle on as a team, document those in Confluence. It's a great reference. And I find that when you write things down, it makes it real and you can reference people to it. So if you're trying to hold the team to a particular standard around what your process is and how we do things as a team, if you haven't documented, you're already putting yourself at a disadvantage. So make sure that gets documented in Confluence. When somebody's getting off track, they're not really following the process or the steps, reference the Confluence link, have them re-review it again. And it's a good way to sort of just reiterate until everybody kind of sticks to it pretty consistently. So GitHub, great tool. We use it. There's lots of other repository tools out there, but this happens to be one that we use a lot as a default. Moving more towards like real, cloud infrastructure, the two big ones that we work with the most would be AWS and Azure. AWS probably a little more so than Azure. Both of them are good. Both of them have gotten a lot better over the last couple of years. We tend to probably do a little bit more work with AWS. A couple things about AWS is they've got a lot of different products within their offering that you can utilize that could potentially save you custom development time. Things that we had to build from scratch, years ago. A lot of those types of features and functionality can be achieved by using AWS off-the-shelf products. And a couple of things to note about any of these sort of cloud platforms is One is make sure you have budget controls in place. It seems like a no-brainer, but we've seen this mistake a lot of times in the past where developers, a lot of times all the developers on the team have the access to spin up resources, that kind of thing. That's the first big no-no. You want to try to limit access to who can actually create new resources and utilize those. But making sure you have budget alerts and controls in place so that you don't get surprised by a really big AWS bill out of nowhere. So a couple things there, but AWS, Azure, done a little bit of stuff with Google Cloud, but not quite as much. But these are the two big ones. And, I think perhaps some of the influence on which one might be right for you could depend a little bit on, what's the product you're building, what's your stack overall. I mean, if you're a Microsoft shop and most of your stuff is using Microsoft technologies, there may be some benefits towards looking more heavily at Azure, maybe than AWS. That doesn't mean you have to go that way, but make sure you have an architect that kind of reviews this stuff before you pick the platform. For startups out there, I would explore some of the programs that they have for startups. A lot of times you can get some free credits, or you can get some sort of a credit to utilize for a certain period of time as you're getting started. So there are some incentives there that are probably worth checking out. Another one I'll mention here, again, a really simple tool. I don't think there's anything super groundbreaking about it. And there's some other ones that are pretty good, but Postman is one that we use a lot for documenting APIs. It's pretty developer friendly. They have a free version. You can actually test your APIs kind of right there within the tool. There's a paid upgrade for it that you might find necessary if you're collaborating with several people on the team. Otherwise, it gets a little hard to make sure that you're keeping it updated and everybody's working off of the right version. But Postman's a good, pretty widely used, simple tool for documenting APIs. Again, I'll stress that the tool isn't as much as making sure that you actually are documenting. So documenting the APIs somewhere, Postman could be a good place to do that. You can actually create like your sample calls and everything in Postman. But more broadly at a high level, again, back to Confluence, that's a good place to sort of document the sort of high level strategy around how you're going to create your APIs and how does it relate to architecture. That kind of stuff would typically live over in Confluence. But Postman's a good sort of on the ground tool for developers to use. If we move towards more communication and collaboration, I mean, it's really important, obviously, that teams communicate well and it's easy. And I mentioned remote working is really popular, and a lot of development teams do that today, even globally. So collaboration tools are more important today than they've ever been. So we use pretty typical stuff, but I thought I would share a little bit of experience about the ones that we use, why we use them, and what do we like about them or not like about them. The first one here is, we use Google Workspace. A lot of people use Microsoft 365. I'm more of a fan of the Google products these days. Gmail is exactly what you'd expect. It's great email. It's basically the Gmail for business. The calendar works really well. Google Drive is a big piece that we use on it. They also have their sort of productivity suite included. So they've got Google Docs, Google Sheets, Google Slides, and we use a lot of that in the course of doing, product development stuff. So use Google Sheets a lot for sort of roughing in requirements or lists of questions. And I think the biggest thing that I like about Google as compared to Office 365 in my experience has been, it's just a lot easier to collaborate and share documents and sort of work on things together. So there's been lots of times where we're talking through something, we need to list things out or start kind of making notes on roughing in things, and I'll just fire up a Google Sheet and share it with everybody, and we'll just collaborate on it live in real time. It just makes it really easy. Google Slides, I used to be much more of a PowerPoint sort of user, but I've gotten more accustomed to using Google Slides again because it kind of just lives in the Google Workspace suite. So we tend to default to that these days also. Gmail and Google Workspace, much like Office 365, pretty much integrates with everything. So you have a lot of options there. And so, that Google Meet, I think, is one other thing that I'll drop in there. When you're on Workspaces, I think most of the plans actually include Google Meet as a part of that. I think you have to pay extra to have the ability to record, which could be important to some teams. But what's nice about it being built into Workspaces is that, everybody has a meeting tool that they can use, send a meeting invite, add Google Meet as a link on it. And nowadays they've made it a lot easier for people to join those meetings. Even people external from the organization is much easier. I find it easier to use than like a Teams, which is included in 365. So Google Meet's a great, meeting tool that we use as part of Workspaces. Along that same vein of, communication, Slack, I'm a huge fan of Slack. I think it got its traction by appealing to the developer community, and that could be because they made it really easy to create channels separated out by different topics or teams. And then they opened up the integration where you can integrate Slack with so many different tools out there today. And so I think that's part of the reason why we really like it. Nowadays, a lot of different organizations use Slack. So when we work with our clients, a lot of times if they're using Slack, then we'll just create direct connections, create shared channels with their team and our team. And everybody's kind of working within a tool that they're already familiar with. They just have channels that are sort of dedicated to that effort that everyone's working on together. More philosophically around Slack, like I think that one of the things that I've seen in development before, especially when you're working with an external partner or vendor, is this sort of black box mentality where you don't really know what's going on and your updates don't come in regularly and you don't really have a lot of visibility. We use Slack as sort of our antidote to that. We're sort of unusually transparent in how we utilize Slack with our clients. And one of the things that we do is when we start working on a new project with a customer, we'll create a Slack channel that has the entire team on it, has the different stakeholders from the client team on it, so they can actually sort of get a live view of the chatter that's going on amongst the team along the way. A couple reasons that's really important. One is I think the transparency helps build confidence where the client sees the activity, so they sort of get a general idea of that they're working on something, what are they working on, and they can kind of see the activity. I think that's a confidence builder. The other thing is that Slack does a great job of allowing a conversation to take place without it being directed at you and you having to sort of make sure that you read it and sort of process it like an email. So you can sort of be a passive observer of conversations and interactions among the team. And then if you see something that catches your eye, you can hop in and answer a question, change some information that people have offered. For instance, maybe a project manager answers a question that's out of alignment with what the product manager really has in mind. They can see that conversation taking place in Slack and hop in, offer some clarity and get that corrected. So it's a good way to sort of keep a pulse on generally what's going on, what the conversation is, and with tagging and a lot of those kinds of things, it makes it easy to sort of bring people's attention to certain posts that need their attention. And then the integrations that we talked about earlier work with Slack pretty well because you can integrate those to Slack and get certain notifications. So I've seen things where they'll integrate it with like GitHub and Jira, and they'll say a developer, opens a pull request and somebody else is going to be reviewing that. Once that gets reviewed and comes back, then it gives the notification to them in Slack, or even in more of a DevOps type of scenario where you're doing a build. If the build fails, then Slack can notify you, or if it passes, it can notify you. So it's sort of a instantaneous way to notify you of things. And I find that kind of stuff, especially when you have a remote team that's working very asynchronous a lot of times, those notifications at the right time, as long as they're not overloading you, really help close the gap between something happening and then somebody taking the next step, which that's one of the biggest killers in project timelines, is just that gap between a dependency getting completed and then the next person sort of picking up the baton and taking the next step. So Slack, I'm a huge fan. In terms of the pricing on that, you probably can get by with the free plan for a long time. The differentiator for us when we decided to do the paid plan is you have to be on a paid license in order to be able to link with other organizations. That was something that we liked and we saw value in. So that was it. And the other one is that it keeps an archive of the Slack channel history. So it helps manage that kind of stuff if you ever need to reference things back. Whereas the free plan is a little bit more limited in terms of how long it maintains that kind of a history. So I'm sure there's other benefits of the paid plan, but those were a couple of the ones that stood out to me as reasons why. I would encourage you to probably hold off as long as you can on jumping to the paid plan, because once you get there and you start creating those connections with clients and you start to depend on that archive, it's a little hard to go back. So most of these tools can get you pretty far on a free version and do that as long as that it makes sense. But I would encourage you, don't step over $1 to pick up a penny, right? So sometimes paying for the paid version saves more time, makes you more efficient, it gives you way more value. So just make sure you look at that in the proper context. I already mentioned that it integrates with everything a few different times through here, so I won't go over that again. And then in terms of video conferencing, I mentioned Google Meet. That one works good for like the team in general. We also have several people that have Zoom licenses. Over the last several years, Zoom has become more of a familiar tool more generally. And so especially if you're doing meetings with people outside your organization, Zoom could be a better choice because I find that it's just easier for people to get into the meetings. Sometimes with Teams, as an example, if you send out a link to Teams, they have to log in or they have a little bit of problem like kind of getting into the meeting initially. I think some of that's gotten better over the last year or so. But I just think Zoom, again, as sort of like the general default, is a great tool to use, especially if you're doing meetings with a lot of people outside the organization. So sales teams, that kind of stuff, tend to use Zoom a whole lot more, I've seen. And, project managers perhaps having that. Plus, Zoom makes it really easy to record meetings and you can store it in the cloud and pull that off. So, these tools, all of them now have the recording capability, and you can find that to be pretty helpful if you're doing meetings, discussing things. You don't have to be as focused on taking notes because you know that you can have a recording come out after you've completed the meeting. So we actually use both of these tools. Different people on the team use different ones based on their role, but they're both good. My personal favorite, if I had the choice, would be Zoom. And then the last one I mentioned here is more on the operations side. This won't apply, well, it may not apply to more in-house teams, but if you do a lot of work externally, it could be really valuable. Time tracking is important for a business like ours. Regardless of whether it's a time and materials type of engagement, or even if it's a fixed bid, we got to make sure that we track time and we understand where the effort's going, how are we managing budget, that kind of thing. We've tried a lot of different time tracking tools over the years. Some of them looked really good, but as we started using them, they had a lot of features and they were sort of complex, but there was like key features that were either missing or didn't work very well. And so there was always a gap, right? We used one, I think it was called 10,000 Feet. They got bought by Smartsheets. It did a lot of things really well, but the basic element of the time system is to make it easy to enter time. And Smartsheet was kind of difficult to enter time into and especially make changes. So if somebody entered their time incorrect, the process of unlocking that time and getting that corrected was really cumbersome. We use Harvest, and Harvest is not nearly as robust as something like Smartsheets is. However, what I like about Harvest is it's really good at the primary thing that you use a time tracking tool for. So it's really easy for resources on the team to utilize Harvest. It's got a really user-friendly interface. You can track time by running a timer, or you can track time by manually entering it. You can enter it by day, you can enter it by week, you can submit for approval. Managers can review to see who hasn't submitted time, automatically trigger reminders. It's just the whole flow around timekeeping, I find with Harvest, is really simplistic and basic. So that's the reason why we went with it. There's a lot of features I would love to have in Harvest, especially around reporting. I think the reporting is a little bit light. However, all things being equal, it's pretty cost effective. It does the primary thing really, really well. It's a simple tool. And so we like it. As our team gets much bigger, we may need to look at something a little bit more robust, but I think Harvest will get us a really long way down the road. They do have a add-on for it that can be used for forecasting and resource management. We don't currently use that. We kind of tested with a demo version of it for a while, but opted out of utilizing it right now. But Harvest is a great tool, and even an internal team, there could be benefits of tracking time because you can help understand where the budget's going, where the time and effort's going, especially if your team works on several different initiatives. You could create different projects within Harvest, track time against those different projects, and it helps you to understand where that effort's going. You can also add cost to the time, so you can even track like what are the costs associated with certain efforts. One small tip that's maybe a little bit in the weeds on this, when you're entering time, one of the things that we found is really useful is that the resources enter the actual JIRA ticket number. We talked about JIRA earlier in the session. Enter the JIRA ticket number in the note. That way you can sort of trace the time back from the time entry to the ticket. And a lot of times that can help you review how well are we estimating stuff on the front end versus what it's coming out to in reality. So pretty big fan of Harvest. I think it's a good tool if you need something that's for tracking a team. I've seen people use Harvest for all kinds of stuff too. Lots of agencies use it for like marketing agencies, design agencies, development. But it's a great tool that you could use internally if you need to be able to track time. As I mentioned at the very beginning of this video, if you have ideas for future N08 episodes, or if you have feedback on this one, like either you really liked it or you really didn't like it, I would love to hear the feedback either way. So you can send us an email to info@n08.com, or I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, so feel free to follow me or connect. My URL's there. You can just search for Jeff Francis N08, and it should be pretty easy to find. A lot of the things we've talked about here, we utilize in our innovation lab. It's the thing I think that we do that's just very special and maybe a little different than a lot of studios out there. If you'd like to check out a little bit of information, go to n08.com/innovation-lab, and you can get a little bit of an overview on why is the innovation lab important, what kind of problems does it solve, how do we do that, what does it look like. So check that out. Let us know if you have questions. Thanks for checking out the video today, and please reach out if there's ever anything that we can help you with, or if there's questions that we can answer in future episodes. Thank you, guys.